السوشيال اكتيفيتيز، الزيارات والروحات والجيد، كل هاي الاشياء المجتمع بتوقعنا كمرأة سواء فلسطينية او حتى مرأة بشكل عام انها تخلص هاي الاشياء كلها بنجاح. فهذا الاشي might lead us back to what you're saying. It's very stressful, it's very hard, and every woman will feel really overwhelmed. تكون تحس حالها فشلت بانها تكون ناجحة بكل هاي الامور. فهاي هاي شغلة مهمة. الشغلة الثانية انه المجتمعات بشكل عام تنظر للمرأة نظرة دونية. إذا بتلاحظوا يعني women are considered inferior and incompetent, even at the level of nowadays you see very high rates of education and employment among women, but at the same time executive positions and leadership continue to be dominated by men. مظبوط. يعني احنا دائما بنشوف المواقع القيادية والريادية بياخذها رجال مش نساء. ففي توقع من المجتمع انه المرأة بتقدر تحقق امور لدرجة معينة، بس بعد هذا الليفل بعد هذه الدرجة خلص انه ما متوقع من المرأة انها تحقق بشكل اضافي. فهذا برضه برجعنا باك لانه المرأة بتضعف ثقتها وقدرتها بانها يعني I can do it، انه المجتمع ما بيتوقعنا انه نعمل كل هاي الاشياء. سوري على الميكسر.
لا
Okay, it's perfect. And I'm not going to try. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Everybody understands it.
I keep telling everyone I can sell curtains in Spanish. I can like talk Arabi mufassar, but like when it comes to these things, I have to stick with English. So, samhoni inshallah. I think I have to piggyback off of what you also articulately said before I get to what I wanted to share, which is there's this debate of like, can women have it all? And if you missed it a couple of years ago, it was like a very high profile thing that happened, starting with a professor at Princeton who was, she was like the leading advisor to Hillary Clinton, and she was the dean of the Woodrow Wilson School. And she left that job because her 14-year-old son was rebelling at school, and he was very depressed, and she would be in the White House whining and dining with diplomats, and he was at home doing all these issues, and her husband was very supportive. He was like a stay-at-home dad, right, which enabled her to do all that. So she penned an article in The Atlantic, and she gave all the reasons why women can't have it all. It was very controversial, and of course women have all these different perspectives, but the questions you have to ask yourself and we ask ourselves is, do we want it all? Do we want it all at the same time? Can you have it all at the same time? And I personally don't believe that that's healthy, right? Like, you can have a lot of things, right? You have to be realistic. And this isn't just something that's limited to women, right? Men struggle with this too. Like, my husband wants to be with our kids just as much as I do, even though, of course I have different instincts than he does. But he struggles with that as well, like that quality of life and things like that. And then the second thing that you said about the inferiority, subhanAllah, I was talking to someone today on my way here. She's very close to me, she's brilliant, and she had to critique an article of a colleague of hers. She asked him a question, he immediately assumed that her question was something like very basic 101. Like, he misunderstood her question to make her look less intelligent than she really was. That's so common, that like you open your mouth and then people get like shocked and surprised at what you have to say. And that's something that, I don't want to leave with like any negative things in your mind. It's actually a very exciting time to be a woman and at the forefront of these things. Like, we just saw the Women's March in Washington, which was a huge power statement, and so like Rajat said, it's like this third wave or whatever wave, I'm not counting, but there's like a really great push now to bring all the issues that we're talking about really up front and at center stage. So I think that some other things that I would personally talk about, because I've been thinking about this a lot, just the phase of life that I'm in, being sort of like in a steady point in my life where I'm not like seeking anything career-wise and family-wise, and I'm really just trying to find the balance that's right for me. And so when I look around and I think about what challenges are still being faced, me personally, I feel like our needs as women are not met in the workplace, right? So the workplaces are designed by people that can devote 100% of themselves, right? Be a total like individualistic person, not have any obligations, and so you don't find childcare, you don't find family-friendly practices very often. And of course we all know like the US has terrible maternity leave policies. something that I've been personally like, experiencing myself. So alhamdulillah that as Palestinians, we have a strong family structure and we get through these things, right? And that's something that is a huge blessing. So when it comes to thinking about that family, that life balance, being family friendly. But there's definitely like a penalty for women having children. And that's like a well-known thing. It's, either you lose out on promotions or you end up having like less pay in later stages in your life compared to like male colleagues. Or if you can't, if you want to follow a different path that's like not a career path, there's very little opportunity to come back, right, into the career force. So in some countries, they actually have like fellowships and opportunities so that you can reapply and renew your skills and things like that. But here, at least from what I've seen, that's not really widely available. So that little support for people that are trying to be mothers at a time that's also a critical time for their careers. So it's a little critical time for you biologically, and it's also a critical time for you in your career. And Ahlam touched on something that I also wanted to talk about, which was that we talk differently to men or boys than we do to girls, than we do to women. And me being a mother of a boy and 2 girls, and I'm always trying to be conscious of this, right? So we tell girls to behave and to get along and to compromise, to be modest, to be humble, right? These are qualities that we value in our daughters, right? But we don't necessarily talk to our boys that way. We tell them to be courageous and adventurous and outgoing and things like that. So when you think about then success at a later stage in life, right, those qualities don't necessarily translate to that kind of success that takes you on a career path. So just being careful of like genderifying those types of qualities and personalities and characteristics. And so also being a person from science, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, but you can stop me at any point. Being a person from science, it's very male dominated. So not only am I a minority as a woman, but also as an Arab and a Palestinian, so taking away that science and math is for boys and men, right, and making it that, girls can do that too. And so that's something that I'm passionate about. So there were other things I wanted to say, but I'll leave it at that.
We only have 3 more questions. Thank you so much for that. It's interesting because expectations and gender arrangements, they're hard to cope with for women. Before I move on to the next question, I have a quick announcement to make. There is a Honda whose lights are on. The license plate is R28CNX, a white Honda.
What?
White, yeah. I mean, it looks white in the picture. Waving her hand. It might be silver.
It's white.
It's a white Honda. Is that for anybody here?
The lights are on.
There. Okay. Moving on to the second question. What additional obstacles do you as a Palestinian... No.
What about us?
Well, we're going to leave some time at the end for questions. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. So leave them. I'm sure you have a lot of your minds. Right, yeah. So after the panel, we'll go on to questions. Okay. Okay. So let's move on to the next question. What additional obstacles do you as a Palestinian woman face? And whoever wants to
I think I'm just going to interject and kind of, can women really have it all, right? Yesterday, my 4-year-old, he grabbed my MacBook and was like stomping on it. He was like, "Don't do your project," right? Because a lot of my work is computer centered, right? My editing, my grad work, very computer centered. So he wanted to play. But I have a deadline, so it's that constant conflict. As a Palestinian, some of the growing up, I'm a lot older than I look right? So you guys, the younger generation has it a bit easier. I came from a very conservative family.
This is ridiculous.
Yes, I am.
You are not going to say that while I'm sitting next to you.
No. So the point is, right? I grew up in a different time, right? I grew up. I did. Oh my goodness.
No, but there is definitely, I think, a generation difference.
Yes.
Like when we look at the younger, yeah, there's definitely.
So I think it could be a change, like when you were growing up, when I was growing up, when these ladies were growing up. You know, I come from a very falahi mentality where, you know, the girl, she finishes high school and, you know, my dad was like, after high school, you know, what's the next step? It's definitely not college, right? So for me, right, for me, خير وبركة, you know, خير وبركة, بس في نفس الوقت في أشياء إنه we have to work through it, right? So being the youngest of my family, I was also the first to go to college, right? So just going to college for me was a challenge. Like I had to fight for that right to get my education against these cultural boundaries that, alhamdulillah, that I'm seeing less and less of. And again, it ties into the gender expectations that we, I think it's particular to Palestinians, have of our girls, right? That we, you know, we give them a certain amount of education and then, you know, it's off to marriage, right? And I pushed through that, you know, I avoided it, and, you know, I fought to go to college. That was one of the, you know, barriers that I broke for myself. And because I wasn't expected to succeed, just getting through my college experience itself was a struggle. You know, but I always was able to find a mentor who was able to push me forward in that time where, just when I was about to call it quits, right? You know, الواحد بيفضفض لحدا وبيلاقي حدا إنه يشجعه, right? And that's what I found throughout my journey. So one of the barriers was this gender expectation that my family had of myself, but I was able to push back. Of course, and you know, obviously, الواحد بده رضا الوالدين, right? So I did it in a manner where, you know, I wasn't, you know, 100% a rebel, right? Just a bit, just enough of a rebel to get to where I wanted to be. But alhamdulillah, like I said, it's a generational thing, and I'm seeing less and less of that, and I'm seeing our girls reach definitely very, you know, wonderful heights, alhamdulillah. So that is one of the barriers or obstacles, this gender expectation in terms of education, which is, inshallah, fading.
I agree. I think it's fading, and I won't even talk about my generation. We're going way back. But I consider myself very lucky, actually, because I guess partly because I came very young to this country, and it was still, the community wasn't like this. So I come from a completely different, and I know some faces that will nod and no, because you know that kind of generation that we grew up in, like the generation that I grew up in. So I still consider myself very lucky that I had the opportunity to go to college and do all of that. And actually one of the biggest challenges was, you know, like people will say to you, where are you from? Palestine. Pakistan? Like, really? Can you imagine that now, one of our kids going through something like this? That's unheard of, because now, because of the news and the media and everything that's going on politically, our children are more connected, I think. And that's my challenge. I feel like my challenge is really more passing this on to my girls and my son. And you talk about, you know, the difference in raising the boys and the girls, and I agree with you 100%. And I think that comes back to the parent, and we as women and fathers who are, you know, on board with all of this, but to pass that on to our children. So the challenge is for me to pass this Palestinian heritage, whether it's through language, the food, the clothing, you know, like that's all these beautiful parts of our culture that I find very challenging because of our society now. And even if it means, you know, taking the kids back home and giving them a little bit of taste of what it feels like to be Palestine, you know, and giving them that experience. That's pretty much. Otherwise, I really consider myself very lucky, and I think it's changing. I think in Palestinian specifically are you know, amazing, especially the girls. We have two
I might not agree with everything because I will talk about these things in Palestine. I was raised in Palestine. I recently moved here. It's good that we're seeing these changes here in the US for Palestinian families, of course. But I think in Palestine, it's still that very specific path for every young woman. Like, okay, you get your education, and then there's this huge pressure to get married. And then you get married, then this huge pressure to have kids. And then if you have kids and you got married, and mostly your husband won't be very, maybe he's a very nice person, but most of the time not supportive because this is the norms. This is the normal thing to do in Palestine. And if you have ambition, if you want to do something, you want to get a job or to continue your education, then it's really difficult. It's so hard that you have to compromise. In Palestine, there's no infrastructure for a mom with kids. بالعربي إذا كنتي أم فلسطينية بدك تروحي على صلاة الجمعة ما في فلور فور الام مع اطفالها. اذا بدك تروحي اذا وصلتك بطاقه عرس بتقولك بالاخير دوما هنيئا لاطفالكم. This is real. I mean, if you are a woman with kids in Palestine, it's a challenge. You will either compromise and do the least that you want to do, or you will give up. So I think it's still very challenging back there in Palestine. Personally, alhamdulillah, my family were educated, and they're educated. They helped me through med school. But when I moved here, I wanted to continue my education, okay? So it was really a pressure, maybe not from my close family, but from my extended family, that I have to have kids. And I'm telling you now, I didn't want to have kids because the pressure that you have when you move to a new country, when you are in the educational system, it's a new culture, new language, you don't know anyone here, no support system. It's hard. So if I have given in and just had kids, I'm sure I wouldn't have been able to do anything. So I still get that a lot, especially for my, extended family, that you should have kids. And it's funny sometimes because old ladies just start talking to me about health issues.